reproduction, learning objectives, sustenance of life, kinds of reproduction, asexual reproduction, artificial methods of vegetative reproduction, sexual reproduction, sexual reproduction in plants. To produce its own kind is an essential and distinctive feature of all living things. Therefore, all living things replicate. The process through which this replication is achieved is called reproduction. Reproduction is necessary for the propagation and perpetuation of any plant or animal species. Without reproduction, it is not possible to sustain life on the planet. All plants and animals support each other in one way or the other and are essential for ecological equilibrium. Extinction of any of them can cause severe ecological imbalance. Since plants and animals have a fixed lifespan, it is important for them to reproduce to avoid extinction. Sustenance of life. After finishing its lifespan, an organism dies. But during its lifetime, it performs a number of functions including supporting other animals and plants in a number of ways. For instance, bees produce honey and wax, which is variously used by human beings and animals. Bears love eating honey. In the course of producing their food by picking nectar from the flowers, bees pollinate them and help plants multiply. This is how they help other organisms and plants during their lifetime. Reproduction ensures that they leave behind their kind to take their place and continue their work. Kinds of reproduction. Nature has provided several ways of reproduction. Some creatures give birth to the young ones like cats, dogs, lions, etc., while others lay eggs that hatch into babies like birds, lizards, snakes, etc. Similarly, some plants produce seeds that germinate to produce new plants while some produce their kind through their bulbs, leaves or tubers. Besides these, there are lower organisms like Hydra and amoeba, which have their own way of reproducing. In Hydra, the young one grows from its parent's body while amoeba simply splits into young ones. Broadly, the modes of reproduction are divided into two categories: sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. The distinctive feature of sexual reproduction is that it involves fusion of two cells, gametes, which usually belong to two parents, while in asexual reproduction no such fusion takes place and the young ones are produced by only one parent. In other words, in sexual reproduction two parents are necessary, but in asexual reproduction only one parent is enough. Asexual reproduction. There are several methods of asexual reproduction. They are as follows: fission, binary fission, multiple fission, fragmentation, budding, regeneration, vegetative reproduction. Fission. Fission means division of a parent cell into offspring cells. It is the simplest form of asexual reproduction, and is generally found in unicellular creatures like amoeba, paramecium, etc. There are two kinds of fission: binary fission and multiple fission. Binary fission. Binary fission is the form of asexual reproduction used by most prokaryotes and protists to reproduce. This process results in the reproduction of a living cell by division into two equal or near equal parts. Binary fission begins when the DNA replication occurs. Each circular DNA strand then attaches to the cell membrane. The cell elongates, causing the two chromosomes to separate. The cell membrane then invaginates, grows inwards, and splits the cell into two daughter cells through a process called cytokinesis. Fission in amoeba. Organisms that reproduce through binary fission generally grow exponentially. This type of asexual reproduction normally results in two identical cells. However, bacterial DNA has a relatively high mutation rate. This rapid rate of genetic change is what makes bacteria capable of developing resistance to antibiotics and helps them exploit invasion into a wide range of environments. Many organisms reproduce by binary fissions, such as Bacteria, for example, Rickettsia species, that cause diseases such as Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Most protists, for example, Amoeba proteus and Amoeba histolytica, a protozoan that is a human intestinal parasite. Pyridictium abyssei, an anaerobic hypothermophilic archaea of deep-sea, hydrothermal vents. Schizosaccharomyces pombe, a fungal organism that is a species of yeast, Schizosaccharomyces pombe. Multiple fission. At times, during unfavorable conditions, a protective cyst develops around the cell enveloping it. The cell, therefore, divides within the cyst, and, later, when the cyst breaks, a number of cells are released at once. This is called multiple fission. Multiple fission in amoeba. Fragmentation. In some organisms such as Spirogyra, the filament breaks up into two or more small pieces. Each of these pieces of fragments can give rise to a new individual, for example, Spirogyra, planaria, Turbelliara, flatworm, etc. Fragmentation in Spirogyra. Budding. In budding, a bud appears on the parent organism, which eventually separates from its parent and becomes an independent, individual organism. The nucleus of the parent organism divides into two and one of them passes into the bud. It is then that the bud separates from the parent organism and becomes an independent organism. Yeast and hydra reproduce by budding. Budding yeast. Development of buds. Activity 9.1. To observe budding in yeast, get a little yeast powder about 10 grams and put it in a beaker full of warm water. Put a spoonful of sugar in it and stir till it is fully dissolved. Then put the beaker in some warm place with a temperature ranging around 35 degrees centigrade to 40 degrees centigrade. Wait for an hour or so before taking a drop of the solution from the beaker on a slide. Thereafter take the slide under the microscope and observe. You'll find that in such a short while the yeast has already started budding. Regeneration. In regeneration, an adult organism can grow out of certain pieces or cells of the parent organism. Some animals, like starfish, have the ability to regenerate lost organs. This feature is generally not found in higher animals. Regeneration in starfish. Spore formation. A tiny, spherical, unicellular body protected by a thick wall is called a spore. Some organisms reproduce by forming such spores. The thick walls help the spores survive in unfavorable conditions, and when the conditions are favorable, these spores give rise to new organisms. Spore formation in rhizome. Vegetative reproduction. A number of plants grow out of the roots, stems, or leaves without any assistance from any reproductive organ. This is known as vegetative reproduction. Potato, for instance, is an underground stem tuber, which is cut into parts and planted in soil. Each part with a nice sprouts to give rise to a new plant. Similarly, new plants come into being in ginger by parts of underground stems, while from bulbs in onion. In potato. Activity 9.2. You have read that some plants multiply by way of vegetative reproduction, and sweet potato is one of them. To observe it yourself, take a pot and fill it with moist, fertile soil. Then take swollen roots of sweet potato and bury them under the soil in the pot. Let a few days pass and then observe. You'll see new plants growing from under the soil out of the buried roots. Activity 9.3. Take a potato tuber and observe it under a magnifying glass. The eyes on the potato will be visible. Cut out a piece of it and put it under moist soil in a pot. Soon you'll see a new plant growing out of it from under the soil. Vegetative reproduction by leaves. Plants like Bryophyllum and Begonia can propagate through their leaves. Plantlets, in Bryophyllum, develop on the margins of intact leaves, and on being detached they develop into independent plants. Vegetative reproduction in Bryophyllum leaves. Activity 9.4. As we know that plants like bryophyllum can grow out of leaf, let's do and see how it happens. To perform the demonstrative experiment you need a dish or a flower pot, some moist soil, a bryophyllum leaf. Now take the dish or the flower pot, whichever you have chosen for your experiment, and fill it with moist soil. Now, plant the bryophyllum leaf in the soil. Leave it as it is for a few days. You will see some plants with fine roots and shoots emerge out of the notches of the leaf. Separate these new plants from the notches and plant them separately in other pots in moist soil. Wait for few more days and you will see these little plants grow into maturity. Artificial methods of vegetative reproduction. There are several advantages of vegetative reproduction. It is easier and rapid, and through this method even seedless plants can be raised. Besides, the plants raised through this method are exact copies of their parent plants with no variation. Therefore, several artificial methods of vegetative reproduction have been developed, and are used to produce multiple plants from one parent plant. The process of producing new plants through these artificial methods is called artificial propagation. Some of them have been discussed here below. Grafting. Grafting is the process of attaching a shoot, or less frequently a bud, from the individual you want to clone to the rootstock of another tree. It is the only available method of cloning older trees of many species. Typically a dormant scion, shoot cutting with terminal bud, is harvested from the upper crown of the tree to be cloned in mid to late winter, then attached to the top of the cut stem of a seedling of approximately the grafting same diameter. It is important that the xylem, phloem and cambium of the rootstock and scion are in contact. Initially, wound callus is formed by both the rootstock and scion. The two then grow together and develop continuous vascular tissue. Rootstock and scion need to be genetically compatible, otherwise a proper union will not develop and the tree will eventually die. Breeding programs have produced lines of rootstock that have high levels of compatibility for other genotypes. Grafting is commonly used to establish genetically superior trees in seed orchards. Mature scion material is used so graft will flower sooner, and to propagate unique trees for horticultural purposes. For example, weeping varieties, infertile flowering cherries. Cutting. Stem cutting. This method comprises of cutting a healthy branch of a plant with leaf buds and planting it in moist soil. The cut part develops into a new plant. Plants like rose and bougainvillea are grown through this method. In some plants, like lemon and tamarind, root is cut and planted in soil, which grows into a new plant. Rooted cuttings. The rooting of branch cuttings only occurs in nature rarely. For example, the rooting of broken black cottonwood branches in riparian areas. However, this is the most common method of artificial vegetative propagation used in forestry worldwide. Cut stem segments containing at least one bud are placed in a rooting medium, moist with good aeration. Auxins accumulate and adventitious roots develop at the cut end. Application of auxins improves rooting success. The rooting success varies with species, age, the younger the better, the position on the donor tree, the cutting originated, lower is more juvenile and therefore more successful, and time of year. Early spring rooting of hard cuttings is often good. Rooted cutting. In forestry, cuttings are usually taken from juvenile seedlings, or from trees with juvenility maintained through regular hedging. The fact that rooted cuttings are physiologically more mature than seedlings has been used to advantage in some cases to produce trees that are less vulnerable to juvenile diseases or have better stem form with less taper. Layering. In this method, a young branch is bent towards the ground and buried under the soil with the growing tip above the surface. When it is pressed down by soil or vegetation, adventitious roots form at point of soil contact. The branch tip starts to turn upwards. If the branch is then broken, a new individual tree is formed. genetically identical to the original tree. Layering. Air layering can be done artificially by wounding a shoot and wrapping the wound in a moist medium, for example, sphagnum, surrounded by a waterproof covering. Adventitious roots arise near the wound site. The branch can then be cut from the tree or shrub and planted. This method of artificial vegetative propagation is not used much, but layering is a common natural phenomenon in some species. For example, western hemlock, black spruce, subalpine fir, vine maple. Tissue culture. Tissue culture involves placing an explant, piece of leaf, cotyledon, or embryo, onto a growth medium containing hormones, sugars, amino acids and micronutrients. Initially, callus tissue and adventitious buds are produced. Adventitious shoots are then detached and transferred to a growth medium promoting root formation, high oxygen level. An alternative method is to take individual cells from the callus and grow them in liquid culture, then regenerate whole plants from individual protoplasts. This would be the most desirable form of propagation following genetic engineering, but is impossible till date with conifers. While tissue culture has been successful in agriculture and horticulture, most important forestry species have proved difficult to culture in this manner. Tissue culture. Sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is the most common method of reproduction in nature amongst both plants and animals. For sexual reproduction, unlike asexual reproduction, a male and a female parent is necessary. Reproductive organs of the parents produce two types of reproductive cells called gametes, male gamete from the male parent and female gamete from the female parent. The male and female gamete fuse to form a zygote. The process of fusion is called fertilization. In flowering plants, the male gamete is a nucleus in the pollen grain and the female gamete is an egg cell in the ovule, while in animals the male gamete is the sperm and the female gamete is the ovum. After fertilization, the zygote undergoes cell division and eventually grows into a separate individual. The flowers of some plants contain both male and female reproductive organs. They are called bisexual. On the other hand, the flowers that have either male or female reproductive cell are called unisexual. Structure of a flower. Sexual reproduction in plants. A flower commonly has four parts: sepals, petals, stamens and pistil. Stamens and pistil are the parts that take part in reproduction. The stamens produce pollen grains that contain reproductive cells enveloped in a sturdy protective coat to prevent them from drying. The female reproductive cells are the ovules in the ovaries located in the lower parts of the pistil. Pollination. Pollination is a process by which pollen is transferred from one plant to another. First, within the same flower or between the flowers of the same plant, and, second, between the flowers of different plants of the same species. In the first case it is called self-pollination, while in the other case it is known as cross-pollination. The male gametes are contained in pollen grains, which must be transferred from the anther to the stigma in angiosperms, flowering plants, and from the male cone to the female cone in gymnosperms, cone-bearing plants. Fertilization, not the same as pollination, occurs after the growth of the pollen tube in the ovary. Self-pollination occurs when pollen is transferred to a stigma of the same flower, or to another flower on the same plant. Cross-pollination occurs when pollen is transferred to another plant. This involves external pollen-carrying agents, such as wind, sea anemophily, water, sea hydrophily, insects, birds, sea ornithophily, bats, and other small mammals. A. Self-pollination. B. Cross-pollination. Animal pollinators carry the pollen on their bodies and are attracted to the flower by scent, or by the sight of the petals. Most flowers are adapted for pollination by one particular agent only. Bat-pollinated flowers tend to smell of garlic, rotting vegetation, or fungus. Those that rely on animals generally produce nectar, a sugary liquid, or surplus pollen, or both, on which the pollinator feeds. Thus, the relationship between pollinator and plant is an example of mutualism, in which both benefit. However, in some plants the pollinator receives no benefit, as in pseudocopulation, while in others, nectar may be removed by animals that do not affect pollination. Insect pollination. Fertilization. In sexual reproduction, the union of two gametes, sex cells, often called egg or ovum, and sperm, to produce a zygote, which combines the genetic material contributed by each parent. In self-fertilization, the male and female gametes come from the same plant. In cross-fertilization, they come from different plants. Self-fertilization rarely occurs in animals. Usually even hermaphrodite animals cross-fertilize each other. The fusion of gametes combines the genetic material contributed by each parent. To avoid doubling the amount of inherited information every generation, each gamete contains only half the amount of inherited information. It is haploid. This is achieved by halving the number of chromosomes when gametes are being produced. When the gametes fuse, the full amount of information is restored, diploid state. Gametes are therefore produced by a specialized form of cell division, known as meiosis, which is only used for this purpose. This type of cell division has ways of mixing genes before the gametes are produced. This promotes variation, see natural selection, by producing gametes with different combinations of genes. Fertilization in a flower. Seed formation. After fertilization, the zygote is formed and thereafter the petals, sepals and stamens fall off, and, often, so do the style and stigma. The ovary remains, and the zygote takes the food contained in the ovules and grows, and eventually turns into an embryo. The walls of the ovule harden up, sealing the seeds with young plant and the stored food within. Fruit formation. As the seeds form inside, the ovary begins to swell and gradually becomes a full-fledged fruit. A fruit, therefore, is a swollen ovary with one or many seeds inside. Some are sweet and juicy with a soft eatable layer, while some have hard protective shells around them. Explosion of fruit. Dispersal of seeds. A plant produces a number of seeds. The nature ensures that the seeds are spread across far and wide so that they do not eat into the environment and natural nourishment of other plants. This is called seed dispersal, and this is done by wind, water and animals. Dispersal of seed by wind. Dispersal by air. Animal dispersal. Wind carries light seeds like that of cotton to far-off places. The plants that grow near or in water have their seeds dispersed by water. For instance, coconut is generally found near water. Coconut falls in water, and since it keeps afloat, it is carried away by water currents. And at some place far away it finds land and suitable conditions to grow into a tree. Animals also perform the dispersal. The seeds stick to their fur and claws and travel long distances. Some fruits are eaten by the animals together with their seeds. The seeds find their way in the excrement of such animals, and it is thus that the seed dispersal takes place. Germination of a seed. A seed contains plant embryo but needs favorable conditions to germinate. Once it gets planted under the moist soil and gets water and oxygen in sufficient supply, the enzymes inside the seed start functioning, changing the stored food into soluble form. Radicle and plumule are then diffused. Radicle starts growing downwards and forms the roots. After that, plumule grows upwards and forms the shoot and the leaves. The leaves start performing photosynthesis and the plant starts producing its own food and becomes self-dependent. Germination of a seed. Activity 9.5. The best place to know about the plants is where they are found the most and in greatest variety. After the real forest, nursery is the best place to find them. So go ahead, take a trip to the nearby nursery and see for yourself as to how many different ways of different plant species follow to reproduce. You will surely be delighted by your own findings. Keywords. Reproduction. All living things replicate. The process through which this replication of an animal or plant is achieved is called reproduction. Sexual reproduction. It involves fusion of two cells, gametes, which usually belong to two parents. Asexual reproduction. No fusion takes place and the young ones are produced by only one parent. Fission. Division of a parent cell into offspring cells. It is the simplest form of asexual reproduction and is generally found in unicellular creatures. Fragmentation. The organism breaks into two or more fragments after maturing. These fragments grow into separate organisms of the same type. Budding. A bud appears on the parent organism, which eventually separates from its parent and becomes an independent, individual organism. Grafting involves placing an obliquely cut twig or bud of one plant, sign, over the similarly cut stem of another plant stalk. Cutting comprises of cutting a healthy branch of a plant with leaf buds and planting it in moist soil. The cut part develops into a new plant. Layering. A young branch is bent towards the ground and buried under the soil with the growing tip above the surface. The buried part takes root and starts taking nourishment from the soil itself. Pollination. The transfer of pollen grains from stamens to the stigma of the pistil. Self-pollination. Pollination within the same flower or between the flowers of the same plant. Cross-pollination. Pollination between the flowers of different plants of the same species. Wind pollination. Pollination by wind. Water pollination. Pollination by water. Fertilization. When the male gamete fuses with the female gamete. Summary. The process through which replication is achieved is called reproduction. All plants and animals support each other in one way or the other and are essential for ecological equilibrium. Some creatures give birth to the young ones like cats, dogs, lions, etc., while others lay eggs that hatch into babies like birds, lizards, snakes, etc. The modes of reproduction are divided into two categories: sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves fusion of two cells, gametes, which usually belong to two parents. In asexual reproduction, no such fusion takes place and the young ones are produced by only one parent. Fission means division of a parent cell into offspring cells. Plants like bryophyllum and begonia can propagate through their leaves. The process of producing new plants through these artificial methods is called artificial propagation. Sexual reproduction involves a male and a female parent. Male gamete fuses with female gamete to form a zygote. The process of fusion is called fertilization. The flowers that contain both male and female reproductive organs are called bisexual. The transfer of pollen grains from stamens to the stigma of the pistil is called pollination. After fertilization, the walls of the ovule harden up, sealing the seeds with young plant and the stored food within. A fruit is a swollen ovary with one or many seeds inside. Dispersal of seeds is done by wind, water and animals.